There's a plant growing in the gravel strip behind your local pharmacy parking lot right now. Pale pink flowers, soft felted leaves, roots thick with something Egyptian physicians documented over 3,000 years ago. You've driven past it 1,000 times, probably cursed it when it crept into your garden border. Meanwhile, inside that pharmacy, you're paying for synthetic versions of what this plant does naturally, and modern mucosal research confirms the mechanism. Your grandparents didn't need the study. Roman soldiers didn't need the study. They packed it in field kits and chewed the root raw. What you're about to hear is 20 plants, not rare, not exotic, not locked behind prescriptions, that carry more documented healing history than most people will ever realize. One of them is the direct ancestor of the world's most famous anti-malarial drug. Another was so valued by medieval monks, they named it after an archangel. Let's begin. We're starting with the plant from that parking lot, and once you know its name, you'll never look at roadside weeds the same way again. This is marshmallow root, Althea officinalis, and calling it the living bandage isn't poetic exaggeration. It's biochemistry. The root of this plant produces a thick, slippery mucilage, a gel-like polysaccharide that physically coats whatever tissue it touches. Your throat, your stomach lining, your inflamed gut wall. Ancient Egyptian physicians documented its use for sore throats and digestive irritation in the Ebers Papyrus, roughly 1550 BCE. That's not folklore, that's one of the oldest medical texts in existence, and marshmallow is in it. Greek physicians expanded the application. Dioscorides, the father of pharmacology, recommended it for internal inflammation and wound poultices. Unani medicine across the Middle East adopted the root as a standard soothing agent for everything from coughs to urinary discomfort. And then the Romans carried it into military field medicine, packed alongside vinegar and honey as a gut-calming staple for soldiers on long campaigns eating hard bread and questionable water. Now here's where it gets interesting. Modern research didn't discover something new. It confirmed what 3,000 years of people already knew. Oilai, the mucilage in marshmallow root forms a protective film over mucous membranes. Studies published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology have demonstrated that Althea officinalis extracts exhibit significant gastroprotective effects in models of gastric ulceration. One review noted that the plant's anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties work in concert with that physical coating. You're not just blocking irritation, you're calming the tissue underneath. The mechanism is elegant. The polysaccharides hydrate and shield, the flavonoids reduce oxidative stress, and the whole package functions like a soothing internal bandage. What does it look like in the wild? You'd walk right past it. Marshmallow grows in damp, disturbed ground, canal banks, drainage ditches, wet field margins. The leaves are soft as flannel, covered in fine velvety hairs that feel almost like felt when you rub them between your fingers. The flowers are a pale, almost ghostly pink with 5 petals, subtle enough to blend into any roadside backdrop. The root, where the medicine lives, is thick, white, and fibrous, and when you cut it fresh, it oozes that characteristic slippery gel. Herbalists traditionally prepare it as a cold infusion, sliced roots soaked in room-temperature water overnight, which draws out the mucilage without destroying it with heat. People use it for persistent dry coughs, irritated stomachs, inflamed throats, any scenario where tissue needs soothing rather than suppressing. So why don't you know about it? Because marshmallow root was quietly erased from mainstream awareness the same way most of these plants were. You can't patent a swamp weed. Antacids in foil packets are far more profitable than telling someone to soak a root overnight. The candy called marshmallow was originally made from this plant's root extract. That fluffy sweetness was medicinal before it became a campfire snack. The plant got replaced by corn syrup and gelatin, and the knowledge got replaced by commercials. But the root is still growing in that ditch behind the pharmacy. Think of marshmallow root like a fire blanket for your insides. It doesn't fight the fire, it smothers it gently and lets healing happen underneath. And we're just getting started. Now, let's talk about something that proves a plant's power in about 3 seconds flat. Spilanthes, also called the toothache plant, Acmella oleracea, might be the most immediately convincing medicinal plant on the planet. Here's why. You put a single flower bud on your tongue, and within seconds your entire mouth goes numb. Not subtly, dramatically. It buzzes, it tingles. It feels like someone injected Novocaine through a daisy. That's not a party trick. That's a compound called spilenthol, doing exactly what Amazonian and West African traditional healers have relied on it to do for centuries. In the Amazon basin, indigenous communities have used spilanthes flowers as oral analgesics for as long as anyone can document. Toothache, chew a flower head, mouth sore, press the bud against the gum, throat pain, gargle an infusion. The Siddha medical tradition in southern India also documented its use for oral pain and digestive stimulation. West African herbalists employed it similarly, direct topical application for dental pain and infections. The convergence is striking, cultures on different continents with no contact arriving at the same conclusion about the same plant. Modern analysis confirms what the tingling tells you. Spilenthol is a bioactive alkemide that affects sodium ion channels in nerve cells. Essentially, it interrupts pain signals locally. Research published in the Journal of Natural Products characterized spilenthol's analgesic and anti-inflammatory activity, and multiple studies have confirmed antimicrobial effects against oral pathogens. One research team described the compound as having local anesthetic properties comparable to benzocaine. That's the stuff in commercial numbing gels. And this plant produces its own version, growing in tropical and subtropical gardens worldwide. The plant itself is compact and cheerful. It grows low, with small oval leaves and distinctive round yellow flower heads that look like tiny eyeballs. Some varieties have a red center, earning it the nickname eyeball plant. The flowers have a slightly grassy, peppery smell, and the texture when you bite into one is initially unremarkable before that electric buzz kicks in. It thrives in warm, moist conditions and grows easily in containers. You could have a living dental anesthetic on your windowsill. People use it for oral pain, eyes as a digestive stimulant. The tingling triggers saliva and gastric juice production, and herbalists incorporate it into throat sprays and mouth rinses. Why don't more people know about it? Because it's a small tropical plant with no pharmaceutical lobby, and because the experience of chewing it is so strange, most people don't take it seriously until they try it themselves. Spilanthes is nature's Novocaine. The proof is on your tongue in 3 seconds. No study required. But the studies exist anyway. Here's a question that might bother you. How many times have you walked under a tree that could have helped you sleep? Because if you've ever strolled through a European city park, an old American neighborhood with mature street plantings, or any town square lined with broad canopied shade trees, there's a good chance you've been passing under linden, Tilia europea, your whole life. And linden isn't just a tree. It's a pharmacy canopy that most of the Western world has collectively forgotten how to use. In France, they never forgot. Tilleul, linden flower tea, is one of the most commonly consumed herbal beverages in the country. It's served in cafes. It's given to restless children. It's been part of French daily life for centuries, not as alternative medicine, but as normal, unremarkable self-care. The tradition extends across Europe. German, Austrian, and Eastern European herbalism all position linden flower tea as a primary nervine, a calming agent for anxiety, restlessness, and sleeplessness. Medieval monastery gardens cultivated linden specifically for its calming properties. In Slavic folk medicine, linden was considered sacred, the tree of lovers and healers, planted at crossroads and village centers. Modern pharmacology has caught up to the cafe tradition. Or the flowers and bracts of Tilia species contain flavonoids, particularly quercetin and kaempferol, along with volatile oils and mucilage. Animal studies have demonstrated anxiolytic effects, with flavonoid fractions showing activity comparable to diazepam in some models. A review in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology confirmed that tilia extracts demonstrate sedative and anxiolytic properties, validating what European grandmothers have been prescribing for centuries. The mechanism appears to involve modulation of GABA receptors, the same system targeted by prescription anti-anxiety medications, though the effect is gentler and non-addictive. The sensory experience of linden is part of its charm. In early summer, the tree explodes into clusters of small pale yellow flowers that release one of the most intoxicating scents in the botanical world. Sweet, honeyed, almost narcotic in its richness. Bees go wild for it. Walk under a flowering linden and you'll hear the canopy humming. The dried flowers brew into a golden, mildly sweet tea with a floral, slightly mucilaginous texture. The leaves are heart-shaped, the bark pale and smooth on young branches, deeply furrowed on old trunks. This is a tree you've seen 100 times without knowing it was anything more than shade. People use linden flower tea for nervous tension, mild insomnia, and as a gentle relaxant after stressful days. Herbalists also value it for upper respiratory support. The mucilage soothes irritated throats, and the plant has mild diaphoretic properties promoting gentle sweating during colds. Why forgotten? Because a tree that grows on every boulevard can't compete with a branded sleep supplement in a blue bottle. You've been walking under the anxiety tree your whole life. It was shading you, and you didn't even know it was offering something more. If you've ever unwrapped a cough drop, you've already met the ghost of our next plant and didn't realize it. Horehound, Marubium vulgar, is the original cough drop. And that's not a metaphor. The first commercial cough candies in Europe and America were literally made from horehound extract. The plant was the product. Then the extract got replaced by synthetic menthol and corn syrup, the name got dropped from the label, and an entire tradition of respiratory medicine was quietly buried under better marketing. Now, horehound has one of the longest documented respiratory use histories of any European herb. Ancient Egyptian medical texts reference it. Hippocrates recommended it for respiratory congestion. Roman physicians prescribed it for persistent coughs. It traveled through medieval monastery gardens as a staple of the physic garden, the dedicated medicinal growing space that every monastery maintained. Appalachian folk herbalism in the American South adopted horehound as a primary cough remedy, brought over by European settlers and integrated into mountain medicine for generations. The plant was so universally trusted that horehound candy became a drugstore category until it wasn't. The active compound is merobian, a diterpene lactone that stimulates bronchial secretion and acts as an expectorant. It helps your body move mucus up and out instead of letting it sit and thicken. Additionally, merobian functions as a bitter digestive stimulant, activating gastric juice production and supporting appetite. The German Commission E, a regulatory body known for rigorous herbal evaluation, approved horehound for loss of appetite and dyspepsia, as well as catarrh of the respiratory tract. Research published in Phytomedicine has confirmed the expectorant and anti-inflammatory properties of Marubium vulgar extracts, with one study describing significant spasmolytic effects on airway smooth muscle. In the wild, horehound is a scrubby, unassuming plant that most people would kick aside without a second thought. It grows in dry, disturbed soils, roadsides, vacant lots, livestock pastures, the edges of gravel driveways. The leaves are wrinkled, gray-green, covered in soft white hairs that give them a dusty, woolly appearance. Crush one between your fingers, and you'll smell something sharp, bitter, and faintly minty. Not pleasant exactly, but unmistakably medicinal. The flowers are tiny, white, and clustered in dense whorls around the stem at each leaf joint. The whole plant looks like it's wearing a fur coat in miniature. Traditionally, people prepared it as a strong tea, steep the leaves, add honey to counter the bitterness, sip slowly for stubborn coughs. Horehound lozenges are still made by small-batch herbalists and a few old-fashioned candy companies, though you won't find them at most chain pharmacies anymore. The scenario where it matters, the cough that won't quit after a cold, the lingering chest congestion, the seasonal respiratory heaviness that over-the-counter syrups mask but don't resolve. Why did horehound disappear from mainstream awareness? Because bitter doesn't sell. Because patience doesn't sell. Because a plant that grows in pasture dirt can't be repackaged in a sterile blister pack with a reassuring logo. The original cough drop is still growing in the field. It just lost its marketing department. Before we leave the first tier, here's a plant that carries a resume most modern supplements would envy. Wood betony, Stachys officinalis, was once considered so important that the Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder listed 47 different medicinal applications for it. 47. The Anglo-Saxons regarded it as a near-universal remedy and planted it in every garden, believing it protected against both illness and evil spirits. Italian physicians in the Renaissance called it the herb of all trades. And then somehow, it vanished from common knowledge so thoroughly that most people today have never heard its name. The historical documentation is extraordinary. Roman soldiers carried wood betony as a standard field herb, primarily for headaches and nervous tension during long marches. The medieval Welsh physicians of Midfi, whose herbal manuscripts survive intact, prescribed it for head pain, digestive complaints, and anxiety. Anglo-Saxon herbals, including the famous Lecnunga manuscript, feature wood betony prominently. The plant crossed from European herbalism into colonial American practice and persisted in Appalachian folk medicine. In traditional European herbal classification, betony was categorized as a cephalic herb, one that specifically supports the head and nervous system. Modern analysis reveals a plant rich in tannins, glycosides, particularly stachydrine, and flavonoids. These compounds collectively produce mild astringent, anti-inflammatory, and nervine effects. The tannins are useful for digestive complaints and sore throats. The glycosides appear to support vascular tone, which may relate to the traditional headache application. A review in the European Journal of Integrative Medicine noted that Stachys officinalis demonstrates anxiolytic and neuroprotective activity in preliminary models, with traditional use strongly supporting its role as a tension-relieving nervine. The mechanism for headache relief likely involves mild vasorelaxation combined with nervous system calming, addressing tension-type headaches at both the vascular and neural level. In the field, wood betony is a modest but charming plant. It grows in meadows, grasslands, woodland edges, and old churchyards across Europe. The leaves are deeply veined and slightly scalloped, growing in a low rosette at the base with a single flower spike rising above, dense clusters of pinkish-purple, lipped flowers that attract bees and butterflies. The leaves have a faintly bitter, tea-like taste, and when dried they produce an aroma that's herbaceous and mildly astringent. The texture is slightly rough, like fine sandpaper, from the short hairs on the leaf surface. People traditionally prepared it as a simple tea for tension headaches, nervous anxiety, and digestive upset. Herbalists still recommend it as a background nervine, not dramatic enough to knock you out, but steady enough to take the edge off chronic tension. The practical scenario: the stress headache that ibuprofen dulls but doesn't resolve. The low-grade anxiety that accumulates through a workday. Why did a plant with 47 documented uses in Roman medical literature disappear? Because it works gently, over time, through regular use, and modern culture wants a pill that works in 20 minutes. Wood betony is not fast, it's faithful, and faithful doesn't sell. Now here's the pattern, and if you've been paying attention, you've already noticed it. Common plant, dismissed as insignificant, documented across centuries, validated by research, replaced by something faster and more profitable. That pattern is about to intensify, because we're moving into the plants that are going to genuinely surprise you. Let's talk about a plant named after the most beautiful woman in Greek mythology, and what that name actually reveals about how seriously the ancient world took respiratory medicine. Elecampane, Inula helenium, goes by the lung furnace, and the legend says it sprouted from the tears of Helen of Troy as she was carried away to start a war. Whether or not you believe a woman's tears grew into a 6-foot-tall medicinal powerhouse, the story tells you something important. This plant was so prized that they attached it to the most famous figure in Western literature. The medical reality is even more impressive than the myth. Hippocrates prescribed elecampane for respiratory conditions. Dioscorides documented it. Roman and medieval herbalists used the root extensively for deep chest congestion, persistent coughs, and what they called consumption, what we now recognize as tuberculosis. During the tuberculosis epidemics that ravaged Europe for centuries, elecampane root was one of the most commonly prescribed herbal treatments. And it wasn't a cure for TB. Nothing reliably was before antibiotics, but it was the frontline respiratory support that kept people functional. Traditional Chinese medicine independently identified a related species for similar purposes, creating one of those cross-cultural convergences that makes you pay attention. The compounds justify the reputation. The root contains inulin, a prebiotic fiber, and more importantly, allantollactone and isoallantollactone, on sesquiterpene lactones with documented antimicrobial and expectorant properties. Research published in Planta Medica found that allantollactone demonstrates significant activity against Mycobacterium tuberculosis strains, including some drug-resistant variants. That finding sent a ripple through infectious disease research. Additional studies have confirmed anti-inflammatory and antifungal effects. One research team noted the compounds show potent antimicrobial activity, warranting further investigation for resistant respiratory infections. Modern science isn't discovering elecampane, it's realizing it was right all along. In the wild, elecampane is impossible to ignore once you know what to look for. It grows tall, 4 to 6 feet, with massive basal leaves that can reach 2 feet long, rough-textured and woolly on the underside. The flowers are bright yellow, daisy-like, and surprisingly cheerful for something with such a serious medical resume. The root, where the medicine concentrates, is thick, fleshy, and when you slice it open, it releases a sharp, camphor-like aroma with sweet undertones, unmistakable and slightly intoxicating. The taste is initially sweet from the inulin, then turns bitter and warming. It grows in damp meadows, roadsides, and disturbed ground across Europe and eastern North America. Herbalists prepare the root as a decoction, simmered, not steeped, because the tough root fibers need sustained heat to release the active compounds. People use it for deep, stubborn coughs, lingering bronchial congestion after illness, and as a respiratory tonic during cold seasons. The scenario: the chest cold that won't fully clear, the bronchitis that hangs on for weeks after the fever breaks. Elecampane addresses the deep, stuck congestion that surface-level cough suppressants only mask. Why forgotten? Why? Because antibiotics arrived and made everything else seem obsolete. Because a root you have to simmer for 20 minutes can't compete with a capsule you swallow in 2 seconds. But antibiotic resistance is making researchers look backward, and they keep finding elecampane waiting where they left it. Like a furnace for your lungs that never stopped burning. Just stopped being tended. If that one got your attention, keep going. Because the next plant is about to redefine what you think herbal medicine can do for your body's structural foundation. This one is going to sound strange, and then it's going to make perfect sense. Solomon's seal, Polygonatum biflorum, is the joint mechanic, and it earns that name not through anti-inflammatory brute force, but through something more subtle. It appears to help restore the structural integrity of connective tissue itself. Tendons, ligaments, cartilage. The stuff that holds your skeleton together and that modern medicine treats primarily by telling you to rest or scheduling surgery. Native American communities across eastern North America used Solomon's seal root extensively for musculoskeletal complaints. The Iroquois applied root poultices to bruises and swollen joints. The Cherokee used it for general body aches and what herbalist documentation describes as overworked connective tissue. Across the Pacific, a traditional Chinese medicine classifies a related species, Polygonatum sibiricum, known as huangjing, as a yin tonic that nourishes the tendons, bones, and joints. The parallel is remarkable: two independent medical systems, separated by an ocean, using closely related species for the same structural purpose. The chemistry points to allantoin, a compound known to stimulate cell proliferation and tissue repair, along with steroidal saponins and mucilage. Allantoin is the same compound that makes comfrey famous for bone knitting, but Solomon's seal delivers it alongside a unique combination of constituents that herbalists describe as having an affinity for connective tissue tension and laxity. Modern clinical research on Solomon's seal specifically is limited. This is one where the traditional evidence is stronger than the clinical data, and that's worth stating honestly. However, allantoin's tissue repair properties are well documented in dermatological and wound healing research, and the plant's traditional track record across multiple cultures is extensive enough to warrant serious attention. The plant is graceful and unmistakable. It grows in shaded woodlands, arching stems lined with pairs of oval leaves and dangling clusters of small, white, bell-shaped flowers that hang like tiny lanterns beneath each leaf pair. In autumn, the flowers give way to dark blue-black berries. The root, technically a rhizome, is thick, white, and knotted, with circular scars where previous year's stems grew, resembling wax seals pressed into the root. That's where the name comes from. The fresh root has a mild, starchy smell, and when sliced, it's crisp and slightly mucilaginous. It tastes bland, faintly sweet, nothing dramatic. People use it as a tincture or tea for joint stiffness, tendon strain, repetitive stress injuries, and general musculoskeletal recovery. The practical scenario: the knee that clicks, the elbow that aches after repetitive work, the ankle that never fully recovered from a sprain. Herbalists describe its action as tightening what's loose and loosening what's tight, a metaphor for how it seems to help connective tissue find its proper tension. Why don't more people know about it? Because tendons and ligaments don't have a pharmaceutical category. You get painkillers or surgery. Nobody's funding research into a woodland root that might help your Achilles tendon recover properly. Solomon's seal is a mechanic for the parts of your body that nobody else is servicing: quiet, structural, and deeply undervalued. Now here's one the battlefield proves beyond any argument. Agrimony, Agramonia eupatoria, earned the nickname the battlefield closer, because when soldiers got shot, slashed, or shattered in the era before modern wound care, this was one of the plants they reached for. And not just one army in one century. Agrimony shows up across 1,000 years of military herbal documentation. The most dramatic reference comes from 16th century European warfare. When gunpowder weapons created terrible wounds that bled profusely and infected rapidly, field surgeons developed a preparation called eau d'arquebusade, literally arquebus water, a wound wash made from agrimony and other herbs designed specifically for gunshot injuries. The name tells you everything. The weapon was the arquebus, the medicine was built around agrimony. Anglo-Saxon herbals prescribed it centuries earlier for wounds and digestive complaints. The physicians of Midvi documented its use for hemorrhage. Gerard's Herbal in 1597 described it as good for them that have naughty livers, a colorful way of saying it supported liver and gallbladder function. On the science behind the battlefield reputation is straightforward. Agrimony is exceptionally rich in tannins, astringent polyphenolic compounds that cause tissue to contract. Applied to a wound, tannin-rich preparations help constrict blood vessels, reduce bleeding, and create a protective barrier against infection. Modern research has confirmed agrimony's antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and mild antimicrobial profiles. A study in the Journal of Medicinal Food found significant antioxidant capacity in Agrimonia eupatoria extracts, while pharmacological reviews have noted hepatoprotective effects that validate the traditional liver support claims. Agrimony is common across European meadows, hedgerows, and roadsides, and naturalized throughout North America. The plant grows 2 to 3 feet tall, with slender spikes of small, bright yellow flowers that have a faintly apricot-like fragrance. sweet and warm, surprisingly pleasant for something associated with battlefield trauma. The leaves are pinnate, dark green, and slightly hairy with a rough texture. Dried, they produce a mild tannic tea that tastes like a gentler version of black tea with herbal undertones. Traditionally, people used agrimony tea as a gargle for sore throats, a wash for skin irritations, and an internal remedy for diarrhea and mild digestive complaints, all applications that exploit the astringent tannin content. Externally, it was applied as a poultice or wash for wounds, bruises, and skin abrasions. The practical scenario: a stubborn sore throat, a slow-healing scrape, the kind of minor wound that doesn't need a hospital but could use better support than a bandage alone. Why forgotten? Because when antibiotics and commercial antiseptics arrived, a plant that stopped bleeding through tannin astringency seemed primitive. But primitive isn't the right word. Proven is. Agrimony was the closer, the thing that stopped the bleeding while the body did the healing. And sometimes the old field surgeon's toolkit knew something the modern first aid aisle doesn't. If you're starting to notice a theme, dismissed, replaced, validated, hold on to that feeling. Because the next one carries divine credentials. There are plants that earn their place in history through research, and plants that earn it through scripture. Hyssop, Hyssopus officinalis, earns it through both. This is the biblical purifier, a plant referenced directly in the Book of Psalms, "Purge me with hyssop and I shall be clean," and documented in Greco-Roman medicine as a respiratory cleanser with legitimate pharmacological activity. When a plant shows up in both sacred text and pharmacological review, you pay attention. The cultural footprint is enormous. Ancient Hebrews used hyssop bundles in purification rituals, and Greek physicians prescribed it for chest complaints and respiratory congestion. Hippocrates specifically recommended hyssop for pleurisy. Roman herbalists cultivated it in household gardens as a standard respiratory and digestive remedy. Medieval monks grew it in every physic garden in Europe. It was one of the core simples that no monastic herbery could function without. Traditional Middle Eastern medicine adopted it for throat infections, coughs, and as a general antiseptic wash. The plant traveled through history as a purifier of the body, the lungs, and symbolically, the spirit. The chemistry supports the symbolism with unexpected precision. Hyssop contains pinocamphone and isopinocamphone, monoterpene ketones with documented expectorant and mild antispasmodic effects. The essential oil demonstrates antimicrobial activity against several respiratory pathogens. Flavonoids, including diosmin and hesperidin, contribute anti-inflammatory and antiviral properties. A review published in the Journal of Applied Research found that hyssop extracts show notable antiviral activity, with particular interest in respiratory viral applications. The European Medicines Agency has acknowledged traditional use of hyssop for catarrh and mild respiratory complaints. Growing wild across Mediterranean hillsides, hyssop is a low, shrubby perennial with narrow dark green leaves and spikes of intensely blue-violet flowers. Walk through a patch and you'll release a sharp or clean camphor and mint aroma that clears your sinuses before you even brew a tea. The leaves feel slightly leathery and have a warm, minty, mildly bitter taste. The flowers attract enormous numbers of bees. Hyssop honey is considered a delicacy in parts of southern France and the Mediterranean. People traditionally brew hyssop as a tea for chest congestion, use the essential oil in steam inhalations for sinus relief, and prepare it as a gargle for sore throats. On the practical scenario, the seasonal respiratory congestion that settles into your chest, the sinus heaviness that makes your head feel packed with cotton. Hyssop works through a combination of expectorant action, loosening mucus, and antimicrobial compounds that address the underlying microbial load. Why did it fade from common knowledge? Because "purge me with hyssop" became a spiritual metaphor and people forgot it was also literal. Because a Mediterranean shrub growing on rocky hillsides can't compete with a decongestant in a blister pack. But the purifier is still growing on every sun-baked slope where it's always grown, still producing the same compounds, still clearing the same congestion. It was just waiting for someone to remember what purge actually meant. The plant that was holy turned out to be practical, and the practical, it turns out, was always a little bit holy. We're about halfway through. And if this is changing how you see the plants around you, share this with someone who needs it. Because the knowledge you're reclaiming here was almost lost, and the more people who carry it, the harder it is to lose again. Now let's keep building, because the next one's a shocker. You've probably used this next plant without knowing it was a plant at all. Arnica montana, is the bruise eraser, and it sits in one of the most unusual positions in the botanical world, simultaneously one of the most popular herbal remedies in European sports medicine and one of the most misunderstood plants on the shelf. If you've ever bought a tube of bruise cream at a pharmacy, there's a strong chance arnica was the primary ingredient. But most people buying it have no idea where it comes from or what it can't do. The tradition runs deep into alpine culture. Swiss and German mountain communities have used arnica preparations for bruises, sprains, and muscle soreness for at least 500 years. Austrian farmers applied arnica poultices after hard labor. Alpine shepherds carried dried flowers to treat injuries sustained on steep terrain. It became so central to European folk medicine that the plant was overharvested in the wild and is now protected in several countries. The homeopathic tradition adopted arnica as arguably its most famous remedy, tiny diluted doses for trauma and shock, which simultaneously popularized the name and muddied the pharmacological conversation. The compound responsible for arnica's topical power is helenoline, a sesquiterpene lactone with potent anti-inflammatory activity. Helenoline inhibits the NF-κB pathway, a master switch for inflammatory signaling, which is the same pathway targeted by pharmaceutical anti-inflammatories. Topical application of arnica preparations has been studied in multiple clinical trials. A systematic review in the European Journal of Sports Science found that arnica gel was comparable to ibuprofen gel for reducing pain and inflammation in osteoarthritis of the hand. That's not a marginal finding. That's a head-to-head comparison with one of the world's most used anti-inflammatory drugs, and the alpine flower held its own. Here's the critical qualification. Arnica works topically, and it must stay topical. Internal consumption of arnica is toxic. Helenoline irritates the stomach lining and can cause serious cardiac effects in large doses. This is a plant where traditional wisdom and modern pharmacology agree completely. Use it on the skin, never swallow it. The evidence varies between different arnica preparations. High-quality standardized gels perform better in studies than generic ointments, and some uses are better supported than others. The plant itself is a high-altitude wildflower. It grows in mountain meadows across Europe. Bright yellow-orange daisy-like flowers on single stems, about a foot tall, with a downy, slightly sticky texture. The scent is mild, herbal, and faintly acrid. The basal leaves form a flat rosette against the ground, and the whole plant has a rugged, wind-beaten look, appropriate for something that thrives at elevation. People use arnica gel or cream for bruises, sprains, muscle aches, or post-surgical swelling and sports injuries. The practical scenario: the deep bruise from a fall, the muscle soreness after a hard workout, the swelling after a minor procedure. You apply it topically, and the helenoline goes to work calming the inflammatory cascade at the surface. Why is it both famous and forgotten? Because arnica crossed into mainstream commerce without bringing its story along. It's on the shelf but stripped of context. A brand name instead of a mountain plant. As a product instead of a tradition. The bruise eraser works. The research says so. The Alps knew first. If arnica surprised you, this next one is going to rewrite your understanding of what immune support actually means. Because the plant we're looking at now has been doing it for 2,000 years, and modern researchers just found out it might also affect the aging process itself. Astragalus membranaceus, is the shield root, and in traditional Chinese medicine, it's one of the most important herbs in the entire pharmacopoeia. Known as Huang Qi in Chinese, Astragalus root has been a cornerstone of TCM immune tonic formulas for over 2 millennia. The Shenong Benkao Jing, one of the foundational Chinese medical texts compiled around 200 CE, classifies astragalus as a superior herb, meaning it was considered safe for long-term use and fundamental to maintaining health rather than just treating disease. Chinese physicians have prescribed it for qi deficiency, loosely translatable as low vital energy, manifesting as fatigue, frequent illness, and poor recovery from infection. It was also incorporated into formulas for respiratory weakness, digestive support, and recovery from chronic illness. The modern validation is substantial and escalating. Astragalus root contains polysaccharides that have demonstrated immunomodulatory effects in over 100 published studies. These compounds appear to enhance the activity of natural killer cells, support T-cell function, and modulate cytokine production. But the compound that generated international headlines is cycloestragenol, a saponin that activates telomerase, the enzyme responsible for maintaining telomere length. Telomeres are the protective caps on chromosomes that shorten with aging, and their length is considered a biomarker of biological age. A company licensed cycloestragenol as a commercial supplement, and while the anti-aging claims are preliminary and far from proven, the basic science is legitimate enough that researchers at major universities continue investigating the mechanism. One review in the journal Aging noted that astragalus-derived compounds show promising telomerase activating and immunomodulatory properties warranting clinical investigation. Let's be clear, astragalus isn't a proven anti-aging drug, and anyone selling it as such is outrunning the evidence. On what it does appear to do, supported by both traditional use and modern data, is provide meaningful immune support, particularly for people recovering from illness or under chronic stress. That's valuable enough without overpromising. The root itself is long, fibrous, and pale yellow, typically sold in dried slices that look like tongue depressors. It has a faintly sweet taste, milder than you'd expect from something so pharmacologically active, and a light woody aroma. The plant grows in northern China and Mongolia, a legume with small purple-tinged flowers that few Westerners would recognize in the field. In traditional use, astragalus is simmered in soups, broths, and decoctions, never taken during acute infection in TCM theory, but rather used as a long-term preventive tonic. People use it for recurring colds, post-illness recovery, general immune resilience, and chronic fatigue. The practical scenario: the person who catches every cold that goes around, the recovery period after illness where energy doesn't bounce back. Why relatively unknown in the West? Because TCM wasn't taken seriously by Western institutions until recently, and because immune tonic sounded vague to a culture that preferred antibiotic. The shield root has been building immune resilience for 2,000 years. Science is just learning to measure what the practitioners already observed. Now here's something that challenges everything you think you know about chronological order in botany. Coltsfoot, Tussilago farfara, is the cough flower that blooms before its leaves, and that strange botanical fact is actually the key to understanding why it's been trusted for respiratory medicine across more independent cultures than almost any plant on this list. Now, here's where something strange happens. The next plant on this list is already in your bathroom cabinet, and you had no idea it was a forest tree. You've definitely bought this. You've applied it after shaving, dabbed it on irritated skin, maybe seen it listed on the back of a toner bottle. Witch hazel, Hamamelis virginiana, is one of the most commercially ubiquitous herbal products in the Western world. It's in every drugstore. It's on every beauty shelf. And almost nobody knows they're using a product derived from a forest tree that was central to Haudenosaunee medicine centuries before anyone put it in a plastic bottle. The Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy, used witch hazel bark and leaf preparations extensively. Topical applications for skin inflammation, bruises, and swelling. Internal decoctions for sore throats and colds. The Mohegan, Potawatomi, and other northeastern nations had parallel traditions. When European settlers arrived and encountered these practices, witch hazel became one of the earliest Native American medicinal plants to cross into colonial and eventually commercial use. By the 19th century, distilled witch hazel extract was being mass-produced in Connecticut. Thayer's, one of the original brands, has been operating since 1847. The chemistry centers on tannins, specifically hamamelatonin, along with catechins, gallic acid, and proanthocyanidins. These produce powerful astringent and anti-inflammatory effects on skin tissue. The tannins constrict surface blood vessels, reduce swelling, and create a mild protective barrier. Modern dermatological research has validated these properties extensively. A study published in Skin Pharmacology and Physiology found that witch hazel extract demonstrated anti-inflammatory activity comparable to hydrocortisone in certain skin models. When the Journal of Inflammation published research confirming antioxidant and anti-inflammatory mechanisms of hamamelatonin at the molecular level. It's not just tradition, it's pharmacology. The tree itself is one of North America's botanical oddities. Witch hazel blooms in late autumn or early winter, after most trees have dropped their leaves, producing spidery, ribbon-like yellow flowers that look like tiny fireworks frozen in amber. It grows in the understory of eastern hardwood forests, often along stream banks and in moist, shaded ravines. The bark is smooth and gray-brown. The leaves are asymmetrical, wavy-edged, and turn brilliant yellow in fall before the flowers appear. The seed capsules are remarkable. They build up hydraulic pressure and literally shoot seeds up to 30 feet from the parent tree. The whole tree smells faintly astringent, clean and slightly woody. The practical applications are everywhere because the product already is. Skin irritation, razor burn, on minor acne, insect bites, hemorrhoids, and general topical inflammation. But here's the perception twist. Most people using witch hazel think of it as a manufactured product, a toner, or astringent in a clear bottle. They don't picture a forest tree with exploding seed pods blooming in November while everything else is going dormant. The relationship between the product and the plant has been completely severed in public awareness. Why? Because acknowledging a tree makes the product seem primitive. A clinical-looking bottle with clean branding sells better than forest bark water. But that's what it is, the skin reset button growing in every eastern woodland, already in your medicine cabinet under a name you never connected to a living organism. We're about to cross into the legendary tier, and this final bridge plant deserves your full attention. Because if you've ever struggled with sleep, anxiety, or a nervous system that won't shut down, this one was specifically designed by evolution to help, and an entire medical tradition was built around knowing that. Skullcap, Scutellaria lateriflora, is the nerve silencer, and it carries one of the most direct neurological mechanisms of any plant on this list. Cherokee healers used skullcap as a sedative and nervine long before European contact. The plant entered Western herbal practice through the eclectic physicians, a 19th-century American medical movement that integrated indigenous botanical knowledge into clinical practice. The eclectics prescribed skullcap extensively for nervousness, insomnia, nervous headaches, and what they called nervous excitability. It became one of the most commonly dispensed nervine herbs in American botanical medicine. And King's American Dispensatory, the definitive eclectic reference text, described it as one of the finest nervines ever discovered, and recommended it for conditions ranging from tremors to delirium. That's strong language from a clinical tradition that prided itself on cautious recommendation. The compounds responsible are bicolin and scutellarin, flavonoids that interact with GABA-A receptors in the brain. GABA is the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter, the off switch for neural excitation. So when GABA receptors are activated, neural firing decreases, anxiety reduces, and the body shifts toward calm. This is the same receptor system that benzodiazepines target, though skullcap's interaction is significantly gentler. A double-blind, placebo-controlled study published in Alternative Therapies in Health and Medicine found that participants taking skullcap reported significant improvements in anxiety and mood compared to placebo. Another study in phytotherapy research confirmed the anxiolytic effects and noted the absence of significant side effects at standard doses. The plant is delicate and easy to miss. It grows in moist meadows, stream banks, and woodland edges across North America. The leaves are small, lance-shaped, and toothed. The flowers are tiny, tubular, two-lipped, usually blue to lavender, and grow along one side of the stem in a pattern that gives the whole plant a graceful, nodding appearance. The name comes from a small cap-like structure on the calyx that resembles a medieval helmet or skull cap. The taste of the dried herb is mild, slightly bitter, and faintly grassy. The aroma when fresh is green and clean, almost like a gentle mint cousin. People use skullcap tea or tincture for anxiety, difficulty unwinding, nervous insomnia, and tension headaches, the pattern of a nervous system that's stuck in overdrive. It's not a sedative that knocks you out, only it's a nervine that helps the volume turn down. The practical scenario, the person lying in bed with racing thoughts, the afternoon anxiety that caffeine amplifies, the general state of being wired but tired. Why forgotten? Because nervine isn't a modern medical category. Because gentle calming over time can't compete with a prescription that works in 30 minutes. Because a creekside wildflower doesn't look like it could silence a nervous system, but it can. And now we move into the legendary tier, where the stories get bigger, the history gets wilder, and the plants carry the kind of documentation that changes how you see everything. Everything before this was prologue. We've been building through common plants with uncommon power, but the plants you're about to encounter operate on a different scale. These are the ones that changed the course of history, ended epidemics, survived wars, and became the ancestors of drugs you recognize by name. This is the legendary tier, and we're opening it with the most consequential plant on this entire list. Cinchona officinalis, is the tree that broke malaria. And what happened with this plant isn't just botanical history. It's geopolitical espionage, colonial exploitation, imperial warfare, and one of the greatest pharmaceutical origin stories ever documented. This is the teaser payoff from the beginning of this countdown, the direct ancestor of the world's most famous anti-malarial drug. The story starts in the Andean highlands of Peru, where Quechua indigenous peoples had been using the bark of the cinchona tree to treat fevers for centuries before Europeans arrived. They called it quina quina, bark of barks. When Spanish Jesuits in the 17th century observed the treatment working against the deadly cycles of malarial fever, they brought the bark back to Europe. It became known as Jesuits' powder, or Peruvian bark, and it was controversial. Protestant England initially refused to use it because of its Catholic association, even as malaria killed thousands across European swamplands. Eventually, efficacy overrode prejudice, and cinchona bark became the most sought-after commodity in tropical medicine. The active compound is quinine, an alkaloid that disrupts the reproduction of Plasmodium parasites within red blood cells. Quinine's isolation in 1820 by French chemists Pelletier and Cavendier marked one of the first times a specific medicinal compound was extracted from a plant, establishing the model that modern pharmacology would follow for the next 2 centuries. Every pharmaceutical drug derived from a natural compound owes a conceptual debt to what happened with cinchona bark. But the political story is equally dramatic. Cinchona trees grew only in a narrow band of Andean cloud forest. European colonial powers, desperate for a reliable quinine supply to protect soldiers and colonists in tropical territories, engaged in what historians have called the greatest plant heist in history. British agents smuggled seeds and seedlings out of South America in the 1860s and established massive cinchona plantations in India and Ceylon. The Dutch did the same in Java, in eventually cornering the global quinine market. During World War II, when Japan captured the Dutch East Indies and its cinchona plantations, the Allied forces faced a quinine shortage so severe that it threatened military operations across the Pacific. The crisis accelerated the development of synthetic anti-malarials, but even today, quinine and its derivatives remain in clinical use. The tree itself grows in tropical mountain forests, reaching 60 feet or more. The bark is reddish-brown and bitter, intensely, unforgettably bitter, which is why tonic water, originally a quinine delivery vehicle for British colonial soldiers, still carries that distinctive bitter note. The leaves are broad, glossy, and dark green. The flowers are small, fragrant, pink to red, clustered in terminal panicles. The implications of cinchona's story are staggering. A Quechua fever remedy from the cloud forest became the molecular template for modern anti-malarial medicine. Reshaped colonial power dynamics, triggered international espionage, and established the pharmaceutical model of compound isolation that defines drug development today. And it started with indigenous knowledge that was extracted, exported, and profited from without adequate recognition. When someone tells you plants can't really be that powerful, tell them about the tree that broke malaria. Then ask them what else might be growing unrecognized. From the Andes to the Amazon, and if cinchona reshaped global politics, this next plant has been reshaping immune science from the floor of the world's densest rainforest. Cat's claw, Uncaria tomentosa, is the jungle immune engine, and its story begins with one of the oldest continuously practiced medical traditions in South America. The Ashaninka people of the Peruvian Amazon have used cat's claw bark as a sacred medicinal plant for at least 2,000 years. Their applications center on immune support, inflammation, and digestive health, conditions that modern immunology would group under immune modulation. Other indigenous Amazonian communities, including the Kashibo and Shipibo Canibo, used the bark for arthritis, gastric ulcers, and recovery from illness. The name comes from the plant's distinctive curved thorns, and which resemble a cat's retracted claws, hooked spines that the woody vine uses to climb rainforest canopy trees up to 100 feet high. The pharmacological profile is anchored by oxindole alkaloids, particularly isopteropodine and mitraphyline, which demonstrate immunomodulatory activity in multiple research models. These alkaloids appear to enhance phagocytosis, the process by which immune cells engulf and destroy pathogens, while simultaneously modulating inflammatory cytokine production. This dual action, boosting immune response while preventing inflammatory overreaction, is what makes cat's claw unique in the herbal repertoire. Research published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology confirmed significant immunostimulating activity of Uncaria tomentosa bark extracts. The World Health Organization has recognized cat's claw as a traditional medicinal plant, and it appears in the pharmacopoeias of several South American countries. Clinical interest has focused on rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis. A randomized, double-blind trial published in Inflammation Research found that cat's claw extract significantly reduced joint pain and swelling in RA patients compared to placebo. Another trial in the Journal of Rheumatology reported similar findings for knee osteoarthritis. These aren't anecdotal reports. They're controlled clinical data suggesting that a rainforest vine outperformed placebo in conditions that affect millions of people. In the wild, cat's claw is a massive woody vine, a liana that wraps around and climbs tropical trees, reaching the canopy to access sunlight. The bark is rough, reddish-brown, and fibrous. The leaves are oval, glossy, and paired. Those distinctive hook-shaped thorns grow at the base of each leaf pair. The inner bark, lined where the medicinal compounds concentrate, has a slightly astringent, woody taste with bitter undertones. Harvesting is traditionally done by carefully stripping outer bark without killing the vine, a sustainability practice embedded in Ashaninka medicine. People use cat's claw bark tea or standardized extracts for immune support, inflammatory conditions, joint pain, and digestive inflammation. The practical scenario: the person dealing with chronic joint stiffness, the immune system that seems perpetually underperforming, the inflammatory condition that conventional approaches manage but don't resolve. Responsible note: Cat's claw can interact with certain medications, particularly immunosuppressants and blood thinners. Evidence is stronger for some applications than others. The RA data is solid, while broader immune claims need more clinical validation. Where traditional claims exceed current research, it's worth noting the distinction. Why isn't cat's claw as famous as, say, turmeric? Because the Amazon is far away, the plant is wild harvested rather than commercially farmed at scale, and the name sounds exotic rather than accessible. But the Ashaninka didn't need accessibility, they needed efficacy. And 20 centuries of continuous use, validated by controlled clinical trials, suggests they found it. The jungle immune engine runs on compounds modern immunologists are still cataloging. We're getting closer to understanding it. They've been using it all along. Now, here's something that challenges everything you think you know about chronological order in botany. Coltsfoot, Tussilago farfara, is the cough flower that blooms before its leaves, and that strange botanical fact is actually the key to understanding why it's been trusted for respiratory medicine across more independent cultures than almost any plant on this list. In early spring, year before the last frost has fully released the ground, coltsfoot pushes up bright yellow, dandelion-like flowers on scaly, leafless stems. The flowers bloom, seed, and disappear entirely before the leaves even emerge. Broad, hoof-shaped leaves that appear weeks later and look nothing like the flowers that preceded them. Ancient observers thought they were two different plants. This backwards biology gave coltsfoot its Latin name, Tussilago, from tussis, on meaning cough. The plant was so synonymous with cough treatment that its very name became the word. The cross-cultural convergence is remarkable. Roman physicians prescribed coltsfoot for chronic cough. Dioscorides recommended inhaling smoke from burning dried leaves for respiratory distress, one of the earliest documented inhalation therapies. Greek herbalists used it identically. Traditional Chinese medicine classified a related species, Quandonghua, as a primary lung herb for cough and wheezing, used for over 2,000 years. European medieval herbalism placed coltsfoot at the center of respiratory treatment. Apothecary shops in Paris once displayed a coltsfoot flower on their signs as a universal symbol for lung medicine, the way a red cross symbolizes first aid today. The chemistry includes mucilage, which soothes irritated mucous membranes, and tussilagone, a sesquiterpene compound with documented anti-inflammatory and antitussive effects. Research published in Planta Medica found that tussilagone inhibits inflammatory mediators in respiratory tissue, supporting the traditional antitussive application. The plant also contains flavonoids and phenolic acids with antioxidant properties. Here's the responsible caveat, and it matters. Coltsfoot contains pyrrolizidine alkaloids, which are hepatotoxic, potentially harmful to the liver with prolonged or excessive use. This is a plant where preparation and moderation are genuinely important. Traditional preparations often involved specific processing methods. Some countries have restricted commercial sale. This isn't a reason to dismiss coltsfoot's legitimate respiratory tradition. It's a reason to respect it properly and acknowledge that powerful plants require knowledge, not casual consumption. Some of the most effective traditional medicines carry safety considerations, and honest herbalism doesn't hide that. In the wild, coltsfoot colonizes disturbed, clay-heavy soils, roadside embankments, construction sites, stream banks, railway margins. The flowers are cheerful, bright yellow, and appear so early in spring that they're often the first flower people see after winter. The leaves, appearing later, are large, roughly heart-shaped, with a distinctive white-felted underside that feels like soft suede. The upper surface is smooth and cool. Crush a fresh leaf and you'll detect a faint, slightly bitter herbal scent. People traditionally used coltsfoot tea or syrup for persistent dry coughs, bronchial irritation, and chest tightness. The practical scenario, the dry, hacking cough that lingers weeks after a respiratory infection, the irritated airways that need soothing rather than suppressing. always with the caveat that duration and dose matter, and this is a plant best used knowledgeably, not casually. Why is it here in the legendary tier? Because no other respiratory plant achieved this level of cross-cultural convergence. Roman, Greek, Chinese, medieval European, all arriving independently at the same conclusion. When cultures that never communicated agree on a plant's purpose, that's not coincidence. That's convergent recognition of real pharmacological activity. Remember the second teaser from the very beginning of this countdown? The plant so valued by medieval monks that they named it after an archangel? Here it is. Angelica archangelica, is the archangel's root. And the legend that earned it that name is one of the most vivid in all of European herbal history. The story goes that during the devastating plague epidemics of the 14th century, a monk, some versions say he was dreaming, as some say he was praying, received a vision from the archangel Michael revealing a plant that could protect against the pestilence. That plant was angelica. Whether you believe in angelic botany or not, the story tells you something essential. During the most terrifying medical crisis medieval Europe had ever faced, this plant was considered important enough to be attributed to divine intervention. It became a central ingredient in plague preventive preparations and was carried, chewed, and burned as a fumigant across plague-stricken cities. But angelica's history stretches far beyond medieval Europe. In Scandinavia, it was a critical survival plant. Viking-era and Sami communities valued angelica as both food and medicine. The stems were eaten as a vegetable, the root chewed for strength and digestion during harsh Nordic winters. In Iceland, angelica was one of the few cultivated plants, and its harvest was regulated by law. Norwegian folk tradition held that angelica could protect travelers against cold, fatigue, and infection. Meanwhile, in traditional Chinese medicine, a related species, Angelica sinensis or dongquai, holds an equally revered position as one of the most important blood-tonifying herbs. The genus bridges east and west in a way few plant families do. The chemistry is complex and aromatic. Angelica root contains coumarins, including angelican and bergaptan, coumarins, on essential oils rich in alpha-pinene and beta-philandrin, and bitter compounds that stimulate digestion powerfully. The essential oil has demonstrated antimicrobial activity in multiple studies. The bitter principles activate gastric secretion, appetite, and digestive motility, which is why angelica became foundational in European bitter liqueur traditions. Chartreuse, Benedictine, and numerous Scandinavian aquavit recipes feature angelica root as a primary botanical. Research published in the Journal of Essential Oil Research confirmed significant antimicrobial properties of Angelica archangelica essential oil, while pharmacological reviews have noted anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and anxiolytic effects. In the wild, angelica is dramatic. It can reach 6 feet tall, with thick, hollow, purplish stems and massive compound leaves. The flower heads are large, spherical umbels of tiny greenish-white flowers that attract swarms of insects. The whole plant has a powerful, distinctive aroma, sweet, musky, and deeply herbal, like a forest after rain mixed with something ancient and resinous. The root, when freshly cut, is even more aromatic, a warm, earthy, complex scent that herbalists describe as unmistakable. The taste is intensely bitter and warming, with a peppery finish that lingers. People use angelica root as a digestive bitter, chewed before meals, brewed as tea, or taken as tincture for sluggish digestion, bloating, and appetite loss. It's also used for respiratory support, cold recovery, and as a general warming tonic during cold seasons. The practical scenario: the heavy meal that sits like a stone, the winter cold that drains energy, the appetite that disappeared during illness. Safety note: coumarins in angelica can cause photosensitivity, increased sun sensitivity, so topical application requires caution in sunlight. Why is the archangel's root not in every kitchen cabinet? Because bitterness is culturally rejected in modern Western eating. because a 6-foot plant with a complicated flavor profile can't be compressed into a tasteless capsule without losing half its character. Because divine attribution sounds like superstition until you read the pharmacology. The monks weren't wrong, they just described the mechanism differently than we do now. The final legendary plant before we enter the closing act carries a war story, literally. Our black walnut, Juglans nigra, is the antiparasitic powerhouse, and its history stretches from Native American pharmacopoeias through Civil War battlefield medicine to modern antimicrobial research. Native American nations across eastern North America used black walnut extensively. The Cherokee applied whole preparations to ringworm and other fungal skin infections. The Iroquois used bark decoctions for intestinal complaints. The Comanche employed hulls as an antiparasitic treatment. Across multiple nations and applications, the pattern is consistent. Black walnut hulls and bark were recognized as potent antimicrobial agents, particularly effective against fungi and intestinal parasites. This wasn't gentle, long-term tonic medicine. This was targeted, aggressive antimicrobial treatment that people reached for when something needed to be killed, not merely soothed. During the American Civil War, when sanitation was catastrophic and infection killed more soldiers than combat, field medical practitioners used black walnut hull preparations as antiseptic washes for wounds and instruments. The tannin-rich bark and hulls provided astringent antimicrobial action when manufactured antiseptics were unavailable or exhausted. Reports from field hospitals describe walnut preparations being applied to wound dressings, surgical tools, and infected skin, a last resort antimicrobial from the trees surrounding the battlefields themselves. The key compound is juglone, a naphthoquinone produced primarily in the green hulls, roots, and inner bark of black walnut. Juglone is so biologically active that it's allelopathic. It kills or inhibits the growth of many plants near the tree. This same aggressive chemistry translates to documented antifungal, antibacterial, and antiparasitic effects. Research published in Phytotherapy. Research confirmed that juglone demonstrates significant antifungal activity against dermatophytes, the fungi responsible for ringworm, athlete's foot, and similar skin infections. Studies in the Journal of Antimicrobial Chemotherapy have documented activity against several bacterial strains. The antiparasitic applications, while primarily supported by traditional use, have generated interest in tropical medicine research. The tree is one of North America's most majestic hardwoods, reaching 80 to 100 feet tall, with deeply furrowed, dark bark and a spreading crown. The leaves are compound, with 15 to 23 leaflets arranged along a central stem, producing a complex, slightly acrid aroma when crushed. The nuts, inside those medicinally potent green hulls, are encased in a hard, corrugated shell. The green hull, when fresh, air stains everything it touches a deep brownish black that's nearly impossible to wash off, which is actually a sign of the juglone concentration. Traditional dye makers used walnut hulls for centuries. That staining power is the compound visually demonstrating its potency. People use black walnut hull tincture primarily for fungal skin infections, intestinal cleansing protocols, and as a topical antiseptic for minor wounds. Is the practical scenario, the persistent fungal infection that resists over-the-counter treatments, the parasitic concern after travel to endemic areas. Important qualification: juglone is potent, and internal use should be approached with caution and knowledge. High doses or prolonged internal use can cause gastrointestinal irritation. This is a plant that demands respect for its strength. It's not a daily tea. Why isn't black walnut hull in every first aid kit? Because tree hull antiseptic sounds primitive when you can buy a tube of antifungal cream with a clinical name. Because a compound that stains your hands permanently doesn't package well. Because modern antifungal drugs made the tree's contribution seem obsolete until antifungal resistance started making headlines. Now researchers are circling back to natural antimicrobials, and juglone keeps showing up in the data. The antiparasitic powerhouse never stopped growing. It's in parks, along rivers, in backyards across North America, dropping those green hulls every autumn, like nature restocking its medicine cabinet, whether anyone's paying attention or not. We've been through the legendary tier, 5 plants that changed wars, broke epidemics, and became the ancestors of modern drugs. But the final act isn't about power. It's about synthesis, and about what all of this means for the way you see the world right outside your door. Everything in this countdown has been building toward a single realization, and these final 2 plants are going to crystallize it. We've traveled from parking lot weeds to rainforest vines to trees that reshaped empires. Now we're coming home to plants that prove the oldest knowledge and the newest science are saying the same thing in different languages. Gentian, Gentiana lutea, is the bitter king, and that title isn't casual. Gentian root contains amargentin in a compound that holds the distinction of being one of the most bitter substances ever identified in the natural world. Your tongue can detect it at dilutions of 1 part in 50,000. That's not a flavor, that's a pharmacological event. And that bitterness, it turns out, has been one of the most important medicinal principles in European herbal medicine for over 2,000 years. The tradition is unbroken. Dioscorides prescribed gentian for digestive complaints. Roman physicians valued it highly enough that it's named after Gentius, king of Illyria, who reportedly discovered its medicinal properties in the 2nd century BCE. Medieval herbalists across Europe placed gentian root at the center of digestive medicine. The Swiss, Bavarian, and Austrian alpine traditions built entire wellness systems around bitter herbs, with gentian as the foundation. When European monasteries developed their famous herbal liqueurs, Chartreuse, Underberg, Angostura bitters, gentian root was consistently among the first ingredients selected. The aperitif tradition of drinking bitter preparations before meals to stimulate appetite and digestion, that's applied gentian pharmacology disguised as dining culture. The mechanism is well documented. Bitter compounds activate T2R taste receptors on the tongue, triggering a reflex cascade, increased saliva, elevated gastric acid, enhanced bile flow, improved digestive motility. Some modern research has expanded this further. Bitter taste receptors exist not just on the tongue, but throughout the digestive tract and even in immune cells. A review in the European Journal of Pharmacology described extraoral bitter receptor activation as having broad therapeutic implications. Gentian doesn't just help your stomach, it activates a system modern physiology is only beginning to map. The plant grows in alpine meadows across Europe. Tall stems rising from a basal rosette of broad, are ribbed leaves topped with whorls of striking yellow star-shaped flowers. The root is thick, fleshy, and deep, difficult to harvest, slow to mature, requiring several years of growth before it's medicinally potent. Fresh, it has an earthy, intensely bitter smell that makes you squint. Dried and sliced, it looks like rough, yellowish-brown tongue depressors. The taste is legendary. Overwhelmingly bitter, warming, and persistent. People use gentian root tincture or tea before meals for sluggish digestion, bloating, loss of appetite, and the general heaviness that follows overeating. The practical scenario: the person whose digestive system never seems to fully engage, who feels heavy after meals, who has lost their appetite during illness. Gentian doesn't mask symptoms. It activates the system that's supposed to be handling the job in the first place. And here's the synthesis moment that captures this entire countdown in a single image. The most sophisticated bitter digestive principle in herbal medicine, 2,000 years of documented use, validated by modern receptor biology, is hiding in your cocktail cabinet. Angostura bitters, Swedish bitters, Aperol, Campari, the aperitif tradition. Every time someone orders a Negroni, they're unwittingly performing a 2,000-year-old digestive ritual that molecular biology just confirmed works. The ancient knowledge didn't disappear. It just changed containers. From a healer's root cellar to a bartender's shelf, the bitter king never lost its throne. It just got a new disguise. We end this countdown not with the most exotic plant, not with the most dramatic history, but with something that proves the entire premise of everything you've just heard. Because this final plant lives in a swamp, looks like nothing special, and has more clinical trial data behind it than many pharmaceutical compounds sitting on pharmacy shelves right now. Saw palmetto, Serenoa repens, is the seminal survival berry, and its journey from indigenous staple food to one of the most clinically studied herbs in modern medicine is the perfect closing chapter for a countdown about reclaiming what was dismissed. The Seminole people of Florida used saw palmetto berries as a significant food and medicine source for centuries, and the berries provided nutrition, calorie-dense and rich in fatty acids, and were used medicinally for urinary complaints, reproductive health, and as a general tonic. Early European explorers and settlers in Florida noted the Seminole reliance on the plant and began adopting it themselves. By the late 19th century, eclectic physicians had incorporated saw palmetto into their practice for urinary and reproductive support, one of many cases where indigenous knowledge entered Western medicine through the eclectic bridge. The modern research record is where saw palmetto transcends herbal curiosity and enters clinical legitimacy. The berries contain a complex of fatty acids, including lauric acid, oleic acid, and myristic acid, along with phytosterols, particularly beta-sitosterol. These compounds inhibit 5-alpha reductase, the enzyme that converts testosterone to dihydrotestosterone, the same mechanism targeted by the pharmaceutical drug finasteride. Over 30 randomized controlled trials have investigated saw palmetto for benign prostatic hyperplasia. A Cochrane review, the gold standard of evidence synthesis, evaluated the clinical data and found improvements in urinary symptoms, though it noted variability between preparations. Some individual trials showed efficacy comparable to prescription medications. The evidence picture is nuanced. Not every study agrees. Preparation quality matters enormously, and researchers continue refining their understanding of optimal dosing. But the sheer volume of clinical investigation places saw palmetto in a different category than most herbal medicines. Extensive clinical trial data is underselling it. The plant is a small, hardy palm native to the southeastern United States, scrubby, fan-leaved, growing in dense colonies across sandy soils, pine flatwoods, and coastal areas from South Carolina to Louisiana. The berries are small, dark, and olive-like, with a fatty, slightly sweet, pungent taste. The fronds are fan-shaped with sharp, saw-toothed stems, hence the name. In the wild, saw palmetto forms sprawling, impenetrable thickets that can persist for centuries. Individual plants may live 500 years or more. And it's not beautiful in a garden center way, it's tenacious and profoundly effective. People use saw palmetto berry extract for prostate health, urinary frequency, and as a general reproductive tonic. The practical scenario: the middle-aged person dealing with nighttime urinary frequency, the early signs of benign prostatic enlargement, conditions that affect most men over 50 and that pharmaceuticals address with drugs carrying notable side effect profiles. Saw palmetto offers a clinically investigated alternative with a generally favorable safety record, and here's where this whole countdown resolves. A swamp palm in Florida, Seminole survival food, dismissed for decades as folk medicine, now backed by more clinical trials than most people realize exist for any herbal preparation. The same pattern we've seen 20 times now, dismissed, replaced, validated, but at a scale that leaves no room for doubt. Everything you've heard in this countdown leads here. The knowledge was never lost. It was just overlooked, buried under marketing, replaced by patents, dismissed by institutions that hadn't yet done the research that indigenous communities never needed. Think back to where we started. That gravel strip behind the pharmacy, pale pink flowers, felted leaves, a plant you've driven past 1,000 times without knowing its name, and without knowing that Egyptian physicians documented its healing properties before the pyramids at Giza were complete. You know it now. Marshmallow root, the living bandage, growing in the drainage ditch while you walked inside to buy a synthetic antacid. But it's not just marshmallow anymore. Now you see the linden tree shading the parking lot as an anxiety remedy overhead, the horehound growing in the pasture margin as the original cough drop, or the witch hazel in your bathroom cabinet as a forest tree with Haudenosaunee roots, the gentian in your cocktail glass as 2,000 years of digestive wisdom poured over ice. You didn't learn anything new. You remembered something old, something your grandparents knew, soldiers carried, monks preserved, and scientists are only now confirming with the tools they built to replace the knowledge in the first place. This isn't about rejecting modern medicine. It's about recognizing that the pharmacy was never limited to four walls and fluorescent lighting. It was always spreading across meadows, climbing through canopies, growing in the cracks of the world you stopped paying attention to. 20 plants, thousands of years of documentation, hundreds of studies, and every single one of them available, growing wild, accessible, waiting for someone to look down and remember. Next time you walk past a ditch full of weeds, you'll know what you're really looking at. The pharmacy was never closed. You just forgot the language. Now you remember it.